The ship that arrived at Earth was broken and bleeding light from a dozen wounds in its hull, and the creature that stumbled out of it looked like it had not slept in weeks. Its silver skin pale, and its 4 eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. Ambassador Thelvos of the Calith people had traveled for 30 days through hostile space to reach this small blue world at the edge of the galaxy, and he had come to beg for help from a species that his own people had dismissed as primitive and unimportant. Humans had only discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago, and the Galactic Council had barely acknowledged their existence, marking their homeworld as a backwater planet of no strategic value. But Thelvos had nowhere else to go. The Lauren Dominion had conquered 17 star systems in the past century, and their massive insectoid armies had crushed every species that stood against them, enslaving billions and consuming entire populations to feed their ever-growing hive. The Calith homeworld of Sarah Prime was now under siege, and Thelvos knew that his people had only days left before the Valorans broke through their final defenses and began the harvest. He had hoped to find shelter on Earth, a place to hide the last survivors of his species. But when the human military escort brought him to meet their leaders, he realized that he had badly misjudged this young species. Admiral Helena Vance stood at the center of the war room, a tall woman with gray hair cut short and eyes that seemed to see right through him. And around her stood a dozen officers in dark uniforms covered with medals and insignia that Thelvos did not recognize. She listened without interrupting as Thelvos described the horrors of the Valoran conquest, the way they stripped planets bare and processed the populations for food, the way they kept some survivors alive in breeding camps to ensure a steady supply of fresh meat. When he finished speaking, his voice cracking with emotion, Admiral Vance turned to the massive screen behind her and brought up an image of the Valoran fleet surrounding Sarah Prime. "How many ships do they have at your homeworld?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. 12 hive carriers," Thelvos answered, "each one carrying 100,000 drones and warriors. And their supreme overmind Zeth Kirak commands the fleet personally." A murmur went through the human officers, but Admiral Vance simply nodded as if this information was exactly what she had expected. "Ambassador," she said, "I need to show you something." She pressed a button on her console, and the screen changed to show a view of space behind Earth's moon. And Thelvos felt his legs go weak beneath him. Hidden in the shadow of the moon sat a fleet of human warships unlike anything he had ever seen. Hundreds of vessels painted in matte black with angular hulls and weapon systems that bristled from every surface. They did not look like the elegant cruisers of the Galactic Council or the organic curves of Valoran hive carriers. They looked like weapons given form, brutal and efficient and designed for one purpose only. 412 combat-ready vessels, Admiral Vance said, built in secret over the past 40 years, equipped with weapons and technology that we have never revealed to the galactic community. Thelvos stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. Why? He finally managed to ask, "Why would you hide such power?" Admiral Vance turned to face him, and for a moment he saw something ancient and dangerous in her eyes. Something that reminded him of the predator species that stalked the jungles of his homeworld. "Because we know what we are," she said quietly. "We spent 10,000 years killing each other, Ambassador, fighting wars over land and resources and ideas. And we became very good at it, perhaps too good." She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. "When we finally reached the stars and discovered that we were not alone, we made a choice to hide our true nature, to present ourselves as harmless newcomers while we watched and learned and prepared for the day when we might need to fight again." "And now?" Thelvos asked. Admiral Vance turned back to him with a smile that held no warmth. "Now we have learned that monsters exist in this galaxy, creatures that enslave and consume innocent species. And we have decided that such evil cannot be allowed to continue. She pressed another button on her console, and Thelvos heard a tone sound throughout the facility, followed by a voice announcing that all personnel should report to their stations. The Earth Council met while you were telling us about the Valorans, she explained, and they have given me authorization to respond with full force. Thelvos felt tears forming in his eyes. A response that his species shared with humans. You will help us? He whispered. We will do more than help you, Admiral Vance replied. We will end the Valoran threat permanently, and we will free every species they have enslaved. She gestured for him to follow her, and they walked through corridors filled with running soldiers and officers shouting orders. The entire facility transforming from a quiet command center into a hive of controlled chaos. They emerged onto a landing platform where a sleek shuttle waited, its engines already warming up. You will accompany me to my flagship, Admiral Vance said as they boarded. I want the Valorans to see a Keleth standing on my bridge when we arrive, so they understand exactly why we have come. As the shuttle lifted off and climbed toward orbit, Thelvos watched through the window as the hidden fleet began to emerge from behind the moon. Ship after ship sliding into formation with mechanical precision. He had come to Earth expecting to find primitives, and instead he had found sleeping predators who had been waiting for a reason to hunt. Admiral, he said quietly, the Valorans have never lost a war, and they have conquered species far more advanced than humanity. Helena Vance looked at him with those cold predator eyes and spoke words that would echo through galactic history. The Valorans have never faced a species like us, Ambassador, and today they will learn why the universe should have left Earth alone. The shuttle docked with her flagship, a massive vessel named the Hammer of Terra, and as Thelvos followed the Admiral to the command bridge, he watched the human fleet form up around them, 400 ships moving as one admiral. Vance took her position at the center of the bridge and addressed her. Crew, all ships report ready. The communications officer announced. Vance nodded and opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Vance to all vessels, she said, a voice carrying across 400 ships and the ears of 50,000 human warriors. The Keleth people are dying, enslaved by monsters who think they are the top of the food chain, and we are going to show them how wrong they are. She paused and looked at Ambassador Thelvos, who stood trembling beside her. Today we go to war, not for territory or resources, but because it is right, because innocent people need our help, and because we are humanity. She raised her hand. All ships, engage FTL drives on my mark. Her hand dropped. Mark, and 400 human warships vanished into the darkness between stars, racing toward a battle that would change the galaxy forever. Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirek stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Hunger, and watched the planet below with satisfaction burning in his compound eyes. Sierra Prime was beautiful in its death throes, its cities burning and its people screaming. And soon the harvest would begin. The Keleth had fought bravely, he had to admit, but bravery meant nothing against the endless swarms of the Valoran Dominion. And now their final defenses were crumbling under the weight of his assault. 12 hive carriers surrounded the planet, each one a living mountain of chitin and metal that housed 100,000 warriors. And millions of drones darkened the skies of Sierra Prime like a plague of locusts. Seth Iraq had conquered 37 worlds in his long life, and he had learned that all species eventually broke, their hope dying when they realized that nothing could stop the swarm. He clicked his mandibles together in anticipation, already imagining the taste of Keleth flesh. Supreme One, his sensor officer called out, its voice carrying the clicking harmonics of Valoran speech. We are detecting an anomaly at the edge of the system. Zeth Kirek turned his massive head toward the officer, irritation flickering through his mind. Explain, he commanded. A gravitational disturbance. Supreme One, consistent with faster-than-light emergence. But the signature is unlike anything in our records. The Supreme Overmind moved to the sensor display, his armored legs clicking against the deck plates, and studied the readings with growing confusion. The energy signature was enormous, far larger than any single ship could produce. And it was coming from multiple points simultaneously. How many emergence points? He demanded. The sensor officer hesitated, checking its readings twice before answering. 412. Supreme 1. Before Zethkirek could respond, space at the edge of the system tore open in 400 blazing wounds of light, and ships began pouring through, ship after ship after ship. More vessels than the Supreme Overmind had ever seen in one place. They were ugly things, he thought, angular and brutish compared to the elegant curves of Volan design, painted in colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Identify those vessels. He ordered. His officers scrambled to comply, running the ship designs through their databases, searching for any match among the known species of the galaxy. Supreme 1, the sensor officer said, its voice trembling. They appear to be human vessels. Zethkirek felt his confusion deepen into disbelief. The humans were a nothing species, barely capable of interstellar travel, dismissed by the Galactic Council as primitives who pose no threat to anyone. That is impossible, he said. The humans have no military fleet. The readings are confirmed, Supreme 1, and there is something else. The officer looked up at him with fear in its compound eyes. Their weapons are already charged, and their targeting systems are locked onto our fleet. Zethkirek stared at the display, watching the human ships form into tight formations that moved with disturbing precision, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something that might have been doubt. Open a communication channel, he commanded. I will speak with their leader and demand their surrender. His communication officer worked quickly, broadcasting on all standard frequencies, and for several long moments, there was only silence from the approaching fleet. Then a single image appeared on his display, showing a human female in a dark uniform standing on a command bridge, her face calm and her eyes cold. Unidentified human vessels. Zethkirek began. You have entered Valoran's sovereign territory without permission, and you will power down your weapons and surrender immediately or face destruction. The human female did not respond. She did not speak or move or show any reaction at all to his demands. She simply raised one hand in front of her. I am Supreme Overmind Zethkirek of the Valoran Dominion. He continued, his voice rising with anger. Conqueror of 37 worlds and commander of the greatest military force in the galaxy. And you will answer me. The human female smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then she dropped her and the universe exploded. 400 human ships opened fire simultaneously, and Zethkirek watched in horror as the closest hive carrier simply ceased to exist, its massive bulk torn apart by weapons that punched through its shields like they were made of paper. All ships, return fire, he screamed, but his orders were lost in the chaos that followed. The human weapons were unlike anything the Valorans had encountered. Solid projectiles that moved at impossible speeds, missiles that seemed to think and adapt and hunt their targets, energy beams that cut through armor like knives through soft flesh. A second hive carrier died. Then, a third, their explosions lighting up the darkness of space like new stars being born. They destroyed 3 hive carriers in 12 seconds. Someone was shouting, 12 seconds. Zethkirek tried to make sense of the tactical display, but the human ships were moving too fast, their formations shifting and adapting with every passing moment, always finding the weak points in his defenses. How are they so fast? He demanded. His tactical officer was shaking, its limbs trembling as it studied the data. Their ships are running at power levels that should destroy their engines. Supreme 1, and their pilots are making maneuvers that should kill them from the acceleration forces. That is impossible. I am only reporting what I see. Supreme One. On the surface of Sarah Prime, the Kelith people looked up at the sky and watched burning Valoran debris begin to fall like rain. And for the first time in weeks, they felt something other than Despair Ambassador Thelvos stood on the bridge of the Hammer of Terra, his silver skin pale with shock as he watched the human fleet tear through the Valoran formation like wolves through a flock of prey animals. Admiral Vance stood beside him, her face calm and focused as she issued orders with quiet efficiency. Strike Wings Alpha through Delta. Concentrate fire on the 4th Hive carrier. She commanded. Battle Group Omega, flank right and cut off their retreat vector. Admiral, Telvos whispered. How is this possible? Vance glanced at him with something that might have been sympathy. We have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Ambassador. And every war taught us something new about how to kill our enemies more efficiently. She gestured at the tactical display, where human ships were systematically isolating and destroying the Valoran vessels. The Valorans have spent their existence as apex predators, consuming weaker species and never facing a real challenge. And they have grown complacent and slow. Another hive carrier exploded on the display. Humanity evolved as pursuit predators. She continued. We chased our prey across open plains until they collapsed from exhaustion. And we learned patience and endurance and the value of working together as a pack. She turned back to the battle. The Valorans think they are predators, but they are really just scavengers feeding on the helpless. And today, they are learning what it means to face a true hunter on the eternal hunger. Supreme Overmind Zethkarak watched his empire die around him. 6 of his hive carriers were gone, destroyed in less than 10 minutes of combat. And the human fleet was still coming, still firing, still killing with mechanical precision. He had sent boarding parties to try to take human ships from within. But the reports that came back were nightmares given voice, describing human warriors in metal suits who moved faster than Valoran eyes could track and fought with a ferocity that made his own soldiers seem like frightened children. Supreme One. His navigation officer called out, We must retreat. We must flee while we still can. Zethkirik wanted to refuse, wanted to stand and fight until the last Valoran warrior fell. But he was not stupid enough to die for pride alone. All remaining ships, prepare to jump to hyperspace, he ordered. But when his ships tried to engage their faster-than-light drives, nothing happened. Supreme One, our navigation systems are not responding. The humans have done something to our computers. We cannot escape. Zethkirik stared at the display, watching the human fleet close in around his remaining ships. And he finally understood the truth that his species had never learned. They were not the hunters today. They were the prey. The space above Sarah Prime had become a graveyard of burning metal and dying screams. And Commander Yuki Tanaka flew through it like a dancer moving through flames, her fighter wing. The Black Dragons had been given the most dangerous assignment of the battle. A direct assault on the heart of the Valoran formation to disable their communication arrays and prevent them from calling for reinforcements around her. 47 pilots followed her lead, their fighters moving in perfect synchronization as they weaved through a storm of Valoran drone fire. Dragon 7. You have 3 on your tail, she called out, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. I see them, Commander. Breaking left, Dragon 7 rolled her fighter in a tight spiral that would have killed a pilot from any other species, the G-forces crushing her body against her seat. But human bodies were built to endure such punishment, evolved over millions of years to chase prey across endless plains. The Valoran drones tried to follow the maneuver and failed, their insectoid pilots unable to process the sudden change in direction fast enough. And Dragon 7's wingmen cut them apart with precise bursts of cannon fire. Good kill, Tanaka acknowledged. All dragons, form up on me. We are making our run. The Black Dragons gathered into a tight arrowhead formation and dove toward the Valoran flagship. and Tanaka felt her heart pounding with the fierce joy of combat that humans had carried in their blood since the first caveman lifted a spear. This was what her species was made for. Valorans through everything they had at the approaching fighters, thousands of drones swarming up to meet them. But human pilots were faster and smarter and more ruthless than any enemy they had ever faced. Tanaka's targeting computer painted dozens of targets on her display, and she fired without hesitation, her missiles tracking and hunting and killing with artificial intelligence that humans had spent decades perfecting. Commander, I have visual on the communication array. Dragon 2 reported. Then blow it up. She replied. Dragon 2 fired a concentrated burst that turned the massive antenna into expanding debris. And across the Valoran fleet, officers suddenly found themselves unable to contact their supreme overmind or each other. The battle was becoming a massacre on the Hammer of Terra. Admiral Vance watched the tactical display with satisfaction as her fleet systematically dismantled the Valoran formation. Battle Group Alpha reports the 7th Hive carrier is disabled, her operations officer announced. They are moving to engage the 8th. Tell them to focus on the engines first, Vance ordered. I want these ships dead in space before we finish them. Ambassador Felvo stood beside her, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief as he watched his people's tormentors being destroyed. Your pilots, he whispered. They fly like nothing I have ever seen. Vance nodded without taking her eyes from the display. Human reaction times are faster than almost any species in the galaxy, Ambassador, and our brains are wired to track multiple moving objects simultaneously. An adaptation from our days as hunters who needed to watch both prey and predators at the same time. She pointed to a group of human fighters that were engaging a Valoran drone swarm. Our pilots can process spatial information and make decisions in milliseconds. And they can function under stress levels that would cause most species to freeze or panic. A Valoran drone exploded on the display. The Valorans have numbers and they have size, Vance continued. But they have never faced an enemy that could outthink them and outfight them at every turn. On the 8th Hive carrier, Valoran warriors gathered at the airlocks, preparing to board the human ships that were closing in around. Them boarding actions had been the key to Valoran victory for centuries. Their warriors overwhelming enemy crews with sheer numbers and savage close-quarters combat. But when the airlocks opened, they did not find the soft prey they expected. Colonel Marcus Stone was the first through the breach, his powered exoskeleton carrying him forward at speeds that Valoran eyes could barely follow. And the massive combat rifle in his hands roared with thunder as he opened fire. Marines, advance! He bellowed. Behind him came 200 human warriors in armored suits, each one moving with the predatory grace of a wolf on the hunt. And the Valoran defenders died by the dozens as the humans carved through their ranks. The Valorans were larger than humans, their chitin armor naturally resistant to small arms fire. But human weapons were not small arms. Stone's rifle-fired armor-piercing rounds designed to punch through starship hulls. And each shot turned a Valoran warrior into scattered pieces of meat and shell. Resistance on Deck 7. Someone called out, Squad Bravo. Clear Deck 7, Stone ordered. Squad Charlie. Secure engineering. The Marines moved through the Hive carrier like a virus, efficient and deadly. And the Valoran defenders found themselves facing an enemy that showed no fear and gave no quarter. One Valoran warrior, larger than the others and wearing the insignia of a Hive commander, charged at Colonel Stone with its razor-sharp claws. Extended. Stone sidestepped the attack with casual grace, grabbed the creature's arm, and used its own momentum to throw it into a wall with bone-crushing force. That the best you have? He asked as he put a round through its skull. The boarding action lasted 17 minutes when it was over. 200 human Marines had killed over 3,000 Valoran warriors. and the Hive carrier's surviving crew had surrendered, rather than face the terrifying creatures in metal suits back in space. The battle was reaching its final stages. 9 Hive carriers had been destroyed or disabled, and the remaining 3 were fighting desperately to survive, their weapons firing in all directions as human ships closed in from every angle. Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirek watched the destruction from his command deck and felt something he had never experienced before: fear, not the abstract concern of a commander losing a battle, but the deep primal terror of a creature that realizes it is about to die. All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship, he ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. The remaining Valoran ships turned their weapons on the Hammer of Terra, pouring everything they had into a desperate assault on Admiral Vance's vessel. The human flagship rocked under the impact, its shields flaring with absorbed energy. But it did not fall. Damage report, Vance demanded. Shields holding at 62%, her tactical officer replied. Minor damage to decks 4 through 6. No casualties. Vance studied the display for a moment, then made her decision. Signal battle groups Delta and Epsilon, she said. Tell them to end this, on her command. 2 groups of human ships broke formation and dove toward the remaining Valoran vessels, their weapons blazing with coordinated fury. The 10th Hive carrier died in a ball of fire. The 11th followed seconds later, and then there was only the Eternal Hunger, the flagship of the Supreme Overmind. Alone and surrounded by enemies, Supreme won. One of his officers whispered, "What do we do?" Seth Kirak looked at the tactical display, at the dozens of human ships that were closing in around his vessel, and he knew that there was nothing he could do. The battle had lasted less than 40 minutes. 12 Hive carriers, millions of warriors, an empire that had conquered 17 star systems, all of it destroyed by a species that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive and unimportant. Supreme 1. The officer pressed. Your orders? Seth Kirak turned away from the display and spoke the words that no Supreme Overmind had ever spoken before. Signal the humans, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. Tell them we surrender. But even as he spoke, he knew that surrender would not save him. Had seen the eyes of the human admiral when she looked at him through the communication screen, and he had recognized something in those eyes that his species had never encountered before. Justice cold and implacable and utterly without mercy. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to punish. The Eternal Hunger drifted in the darkness, its engines dead and its weapons silent, surrounded by human warships that waited like wolves circling a wounded animal inside the crippled flagship. Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirak sat on his command throne and tried to understand how his empire had fallen so quickly. 43 minutes. That was how long the battle had lasted from the first human shot to the final Valoran surrender. 43 minutes to destroy a military force that had conquered 17 star systems and enslaved billions of sentient beings. His officers stood around him in stunned silence, their compound eyes dull with shock and their mandibles clicking nervously as they waited for their fate. Supreme One of them ventured. The humans are demanding that we allow them to board. Then let them board, Seth Kirak replied, his voice flat and empty. What does it matter now? He had tried to trigger the self-destruct system, hoping to deny the humans the satisfaction of capturing him alive. But when he entered the codes, his console had simply displayed a message in the human language. Nice try. The humans had somehow taken control of his ship's computer systems during the battle, slicing through Valoran security protocols like they were nothing. And now he could not even choose the manner of his own death. A dull thud echoed through the hull as the human boarding craft attached to his ship, and Zeth Kirak felt his heart beating faster as he waited for the inevitable. The doors to his command center were designed to resist any assault, reinforced with layers of armor and protected by the best warriors in his hive. But when the humans came for him, those defenses meant nothing. A single explosion tore the doors from their frames, and human marines poured through the breach in a wave of black armor and burning weapons. Colonel Marcus Stone led the assault, his exoskeleton scarred from the earlier fighting but still moving with deadly grace. And behind him came soldiers who had already proven themselves more dangerous than anything the Valorans had ever faced. "Contact front!" Someone yelled. "Neutralize them." Stone commanded. The Valoran guards tried to fight, tried to protect their supreme overmind with the same ferocity that had conquered 37 worlds. But they might as well have been throwing themselves against a mountain. Stone moved through them like a force of nature, his rifle roaring with each shot, his armored fists crushing chitin and bone whenever an enemy got too close. In less than 3 minutes, every Valoran guard was dead or dying, and the supreme overmind sat alone on his throne. Surrounded by the corpses of his protectors, Stone approached the throne and looked up at the massive insectoid creature that had ordered the deaths of billions. "Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirak," he said, his voice flat and cold. "By the authority of the United Earth Government, I am placing you under arrest for crimes against sentient life." Zeth Kirak laughed, a harsh clicking sound that echoed through the ruined command center. "Crimes?" he repeated. "I have done only what the strong have always done to the weak. I have taken what I wanted because I had the power to take it." Stone stared at him without expression. "You enslaved billions of innocent people and used them as food for your hives." "They were prey," Zeth Kirak said. "Nothing more." Stone was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet and dangerous. "You know what humans call creatures that prey on the helpless?" He leaned closer to the supreme overmind. "Monsters," before Zeth Kirak could respond. Stone grabbed him by the neck and dragged him from his throne, throwing him to the deck with casual violence. "You think you are strong," Stone continued, looking down at the crumpled form of the supreme overmind. "But you have never faced anything stronger than you. You have never known what it feels like to be prey." He pulled Zeth Kirak to his feet and forced him to look at the display screens that still showed the wreckage of his fleet. "Look at what your strength bought you," Stone said. "Look at what happens when real predators come hunting." Zeth Kirak looked, and what he saw broke something inside him. 12 hive carriers reduced to debris, millions of warriors dead, empire that had seemed invincible just hours ago, now shattered beyond any hope of recovery. "What will you do with me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That is not my decision to make," Stone replied. "But first, you are going to send a message." He forced the supreme overmind to face a communication array and activated a broadcast that would reach every Valoran ship, colony, and outpost in the galaxy. "Tell them what happened here," Stone commanded. "Tell them what you saw." Zeth Kirak stared at the recording light and felt the weight of his defeat crushing him. "This is Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirak," he began, his voice trembling. "The fleet at Sierra Prime has been destroyed by a species called humanity, and I have been captured by their forces." He paused, struggling to find words for what he had witnessed. "The humans are coming," he finally said. "Run if you wish, but it will not matter. Nothing you do will matter." He looked at Colonel Stone with something like hatred in his compound eyes. "They are not like us. They are not like any species we have ever encountered. And they will not stop until we are destroyed." Stone ended the recording and smiled without warmth. "That ought to get their attention," he said. On the surface of Sierra Prime, the Kelith people were emerging from their shelters for the first time in weeks, looking up at skies that were no longer filled with the shadows of Valoran Drone's ambassador. Telvos had returned to his homeworld aboard a human shuttle, and he walked through streets that had been battlefields just hours ago, staring at the destruction that his people had endured. But everywhere he looked, He also saw Hope human soldiers were already on the ground, distributing food and medicine, helping the wounded and protecting the survivors from any Valoran stragglers that might still be hiding. A Kelith child approached him, her silver skin dirty and her clothes torn, and she looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much horror for one so young. "Are the monsters gone?" she asked as Thelvos knelt beside her and pointed up at the sky, where the lights of human ships were still visible. "Yes, little one," he said. "The monsters are gone, and they are never coming back." "Who are the people in the metal suits?" she asked. "They are called humans," Thelvos replied. "And they came to save us." The child looked at him with confusion. Why? It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of everything that Thelvos had witnessed. Why had the humans come? They had no alliance with the Kelith, no treaty or obligation that required them to help. They had hidden their power for decades, content to let the galaxy believe they were primitive and weak, and yet, when they learned of the suffering of innocent people, they had revealed themselves and gone to war against one of the most powerful empires in known space. I asked their admiral the same question, Thelvos told the child, and she said something that I will never forget. He looked up at the human ships in the sky. She said that humans protect people who cannot protect themselves, because that is what humans do. The child smiled, the first smile that Thelvos had seen on Kelith's face in weeks. "I like the humans," she said. Thelvos nodded and felt tears forming in his eyes. "So do I." "Little one," he whispered, "so do I." Above them, the hammer of Terra hung in orbit like a guardian angel made of steel and fire, and aboard the ship, Admiral Helena Vance watched the reports coming in from her fleet. The battle was over. The Valoran fleet was destroyed, and somewhere in the holding cells of her ship, a monster who had murdered billions was waiting to face justice. She turned away from the display and allowed herself a small smile. It was a good start. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Sarah Prime, and the galaxy would never be the same. News of the human victory had spread like wildfire across known space, carried by traders and refugees in the desperate broadcast that Supreme Overmind Zeth Kirik had been forced to send to his own people, species that had cowered before the Valoran dominion for centuries, suddenly found themselves looking toward Earth with a mixture of hope and fear. Hope, because the monsters who had haunted their nightmares were finally being destroyed. Fear, because the creatures who had destroyed those monsters were perhaps even more terrifying. The Galactic Council had called an emergency session to discuss the human situation, and Ambassador Thelvos had been asked to speak on behalf of the species that the humans had saved. Stood before representatives of 100 worlds, his silver skin gleaming under the council chamber lights, and he told them the truth about what he had seen. "The humans are not what we thought they were," he said. "We dismissed them as primitives, as children stumbling into a galaxy they did not understand. But we were wrong." He activated a holographic display that showed footage from the battle. Human ships tearing through Valoran formations with brutal efficiency. They hid their true nature from us, concealed their power behind a mask of harmlessness, because they knew what they were capable of, and they feared what they might become. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but when they learned of the Valoran atrocities, when they saw innocent people suffering, they revealed themselves and went to war, not for territory or resources, but for justice. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "I have spoken with Admiral Vance since the battle, and I asked her why humanity chose to hide for so long." The chamber fell silent. She told me that humans spent 10,000 years fighting each other, perfecting the art of war until they became more dangerous than any species in the galaxy. And when they finally reached the stars, they were afraid of themselves. Thelvos paused to let that sink in. They saw what they could become, and they made a conscious choice to be better. to hide their claws until they were needed. He straightened his spine and spoke with conviction. The humans are not conquerors. They are protectors, and they have proven that with blood and fire and the liberation of 17 star systems across the galaxy, human fleets were systematically dismantling what remained of the Valoran Dominion Admiral. Vance had divided her forces into task groups, each one assigned to a different conquered system, and they were methodically freeing every species that the Valorans had enslaved. Battles were short and brutal, without their supreme overmind and their main fleet. The Valoran colonies had no chance against human weapons and tactics, and one by one they fell. But the humans did not come as conquerors. They came as liberators on world after world. Human soldiers found the survivors of Valoran rule, beings who had been bred as livestock and worked as slaves, and they gave them food and medicine and something far more precious. Freedom Commander Yuki Tanaka stood on the surface of a world called Helios 3, watching her Marines distribute supplies to the former slaves. And she felt a pride that no military decoration could ever match. A small creature approached her, barely reaching her knee, its body covered in soft blue fur, and its large eyes filled with confusion. "Are you human?" it asked in a trembling voice. Tanaka knelt down to meet its eyes. "Yes, I am," she said. "Are you going to eat us?" Tanaka felt her heart break at the question. "No, little one," she said gently. "We are going to take you home." "Home?" "The place where your people came from. Before the Valorans took you." The creature's eyes filled with tears. "I do not remember home," it whispered. Tanaka reached out and took its small hand in hers. "Then we will help you find it," she promised. Back on Sierra Prime, Admiral Vance stood on the observation deck of her flagship and looked down at the planet that had become a symbol of human intervention in galactic affairs. Ambassador Thelvos joined her, and together they watched the lights of cities beginning to glow again as the Kelith people rebuilt their world. "The Galactic Council has voted to recognize Earth as a major power," Thelvos said, "and they have asked your government to take a permanent seat on the council." Vance nodded without surprise. "What else?" "They are afraid of you," Thelvos admitted. "Some of them want to form defensive alliances against humanity, to prepare for the day when you might turn your weapons on them." Vance turned to look at him with those predator eyes that he had come to respect. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," Thelvos replied. "I told them that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, capable of violence beyond anything we have ever seen." He paused. "And I told them that humans choose to use that power to protect the innocent, because that is who they are." Vance was silent for a moment. "We are not saints, Ambassador," she finally said. "We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history, things that would horrify any species in this galaxy." "I know," Thelvos said. "And yet you came when we needed you. You bled for us. You died for us. You asked nothing in return except the chance to stop the suffering." He reached out and touched her arm with one of his 4 hands. "Whatever darkness exists in your past, it does not define what you are now." Vance looked back at the planet below and spoke quietly. "We spent so long being afraid of ourselves, afraid of what we might become if we let our nature loose on the galaxy." She turned to face him. "But some evils cannot be tolerated. Some monsters must be destroyed. And if that means becoming monsters ourselves for a time, then so be it." "You are not monsters," Thelvos said firmly. "You are guardians." A message came through on the Admiral's communicator, and she glanced at it with a grim smile. "Speaking of monsters," she said, "they are ready to begin the trial." Supreme Overmind Zethkarak stood before a galactic tribunal on a station orbiting Sierra Prime, accused of genocide and crimes against sentient life. Representatives from every species the Valorans had conquered were present, their eyes filled with hatred and pain as they watched the creature who had caused so much suffering The evidence was overwhelming recordings of mass executions, testimony from survivors, documentation of the breeding camps where sentient beings were raised as food. The trial lasted 3 days. The verdict was unanimous guilty on all counts. The execution was broadcast across the galaxy, a message to every tyrant and conqueror that their crimes would not go unpunished. And standing in the observation gallery, watching justice being served, was a young Kelith girl who had asked Ambassador Thelvos whether the monsters were truly gone. She had asked to witness the end, to see with her own eyes that the creature who had murdered her family would never hurt anyone again when it was over. She turned to Admiral Vance, who had accompanied her at her request. "Is it finished?" she asked. Vance knelt to meet her eyes, just as Commander Tanaka had done with another frightened child on another wounded world. "The Valorans are finished," she said. "They will never threaten your people again. Will you stay?" The girl asked, "Will the humans stay to protect us?" Vance smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. "We will protect everyone," she said. "That is what humans do." The girl threw her arms around the Admiral's neck and held on tight. And Vance felt something she had not felt since the war began. Peace across the galaxy. Species were beginning to whisper a new truth, a story that would be told for millennia to come. The humans had emerged from the darkness of their hidden world, revealed themselves as the most terrifying warriors the galaxy had ever known, and then done something that no one expected. They had chosen to be heroes. They had chosen to protect the weak and punish the wicked, to stand as guardians against the monsters that lurked in the darkness between stars and heaven. Help anyone who threatened the innocent, for humanity's mercy was reserved for those who deserved it, and monsters deserved only fire. The end.